The NFL's off-season is heating up. Free agency is beginning to reshape rosters across the league. Teams are making aggressive moves to improve depth and fill key positions, and as that starts happening, the focus slowly begins to shift towards the draft. Now, draft boards are beginning to take shape. Narratives are starting to form around certain prospects, and every year around this time, there are a few conversations that start to gain a lot of traction. One of the biggest right now is the idea that Caleb Downs could fall in the 2026 NFL draft. Now, a lot of the conversation has come from concerns around his knee, and injuries are always something front offices take very seriously when they're evaluating prospects. But when you actually sit down and you watch the tape of his days in college, and when you look at the production he provided, and when you look at what NFL defenses are asking from these defensive backs these days, that narrative starts to fall apart pretty quickly. Because when draft night arrives, there is one thing becoming pretty clear. Caleb Downs is not falling. I've still got him going at 2 to the Jets, but let's wait and see. And later in the show, we're also going to talk about the Arizona Cardinals moving on from Kyler Murray, what that means for the quarterback market, why a bridge quarterback like Malik Willis could be a very interesting option for them. And we'll also touch on some of the interesting roster changes happening around the league in free agency. Welcome to the Sunday Standard.
Welcome to the Sunday Standard.
Welcome back. This is episode 2 of the Sunday Standard. My name is Anders. Now, when I went to film this originally, it was about 2 p.m. on Saturday afternoon on the 7th of March, and that seemed to be around the same time that Max Crosby decided that he wanted to go and play for the Baltimore Ravens. So I've decided to take that information in, and I've added that to this episode because it is such big breaking news now that he has finally made the move. So we will touch on that briefly now. Now, 2 first-round picks for a player of Max Crosby's standard, I think, is a fair deal. I believe the Cowboys were in the realm of 1 first-rounder and a second-rounder. But when you look at a player as talented as Max, you want to get the most out of him. And I think 2 first-rounders from Baltimore is a fair trade. Now, that being said, 2 first-rounders, so this year and next, you really have to believe as an organisation that you are still in a championship window, which I certainly do believe they are. They've got a good core young group of kids in the wide receiver sort of room. Obviously, Derrick Henry is ageing. He's 32. We're looking at Lamar Jackson with that $75.5 million cap hit this year being 29, and then obviously Mark Andrews as well, getting up there in age. So you really need, it's a really win now sort of trade. You have to have belief that you can stay healthy, which obviously over the last few years they've been up and down regarding their health, but I think they need to win the division again this season, and then they can look towards making hopefully a deep playoff run. Now, I completely understand why Baltimore went out and did this, and why they've decided to go and get a player like Max Crosby. He is one of the best defensive players in the league. No one's doubting that. But when you play in a division where you've got TJ Watt and Myles Garrett twice a year, you kind of have to go and get something that pushes the needle and gets you to have someone that can negate aforementioned players on that side of the ball. So it certainly makes sense that Baltimore were the ones that pulled the trigger. Now, I guess on the other side of the ball, what does this mean for the Raiders? Now, like I said in episode 1, and like we all know, Mendoza's going to go first. There's no doubt about that. But like I said, he's a plug-and-play quarterback. You go and you get him, you put him in, and you play him. Now, obviously, Gino's been moved on today as well. That was another big news. Expected, but big news in the scheme of things. And that really builds the argument that they're going to probably start Mendoza day 1. Do they bring in a bridge quarterback? No, I don't think they do. They've got Kenny Pickett and Aiden O'Connell on the book still. I think they use those boys. They bring in Mendoza at the first pick, and that should be enough to challenge for maybe the starting role. Kenny Pickett's handy with the ball. We've seen him at the Eagles, and we've seen him, certainly he can play. He can play. So there's no doubt in the fact that he could potentially go for that role as well as QB1 there at the Las Vegas Raiders. But nonetheless, they do get the 14th pick from the Ravens, and I think they can find an absolute gem there at 14 as well. So we shall wait and see. But unless you believe your roster can win a Super Bowl, you're not trading two of your first round picks of the next 2 years. Now, with that breaking news out of the way, let's get into the rest of today's episode. Like I said, NFL offseason heating up, free agency shaping rosters, draft conversations have started to begin. But like I said in the introduction, Caleb Downs is one of the biggest talking points, at least from my standpoint, in regards to where he will fall in the draft. Now, cool, yep, you've got the degenerative ACL, you've got a partially torn meniscus. The truth behind that, look, we can assume that's true, but at the end of the day, this bloke is a generational talent. He's not only the best safety in the class, I would go on a whim and say that he's probably the best defensive prospect that I've seen in quite some time. And when you're getting compared to the likes of Troy Polamalu, you kind of know that this kid's pretty good. So I guess from that standpoint, if you're a front office, do you pass on that talent? No, I don't think you do. You kind of have to pull the trigger and hope that it all works out. Now, look, if he does go to the Jets, I do have a little bit of concern for his future in the league if they don't deal with the degenerative ACL and the partially torn meniscus, especially seeing as they were ranked 29th on their report card this season, down from 21. So I certainly get my concerns there, but you really need to look at him as a generational talent, and you need to look after him, and you need to surround him by the right people, especially in the medical department, and hope that he stays healthy, because I think he changes games for you in the near, not too distant future. But I certainly believe he does go high on the draft board. Now, a few other draft risers based off what I saw at the Combine. Now, the first obvious one is Sonny Styles, the Ohio State linebacker. Outstanding Combine. Just absolutely incredible. Only player over 230 pounds to run a sub 4.5 with a 40-inch vert and 11-foot broad jump since 2003. Look, that's just athletically gifted. So you have to say that his draft stock is been rising significantly since those numbers came up from the Combine. Another one, Kenyon Sadiq, the Oregon tight end. Now, again, 43.5 vert at 241 pounds and a 4.39 40 at 6'3". Athletically, he reminds me more of a compact version of one of my favourite players. He's yet to prove himself, but that is Kyle Pitts. So realistically, I think Kenyon Sadiq does also go quite high in this draft. Not as high as many people might think he goes. I have him somewhere in that 11 to 15, 16 sort of area, depending on needs of the team. But he doesn't drop any further than 20 at the end of the day. And finally, Ruben Bain Jr., the defensive end out of Miami. Now, coming off a career best year, 9.5 sacks, 15.5 tackles for loss. Miami has quietly produced some of the best NFL-ready defensive linemen in recent years. So I also think, based off what I saw just throughout the whole year with Bain, I think he's doing himself no harm, and definitely stock is rising on that side for himself. Now, when we talk about draft risers, obviously there has to be draft fallers. Now, I'm going to focus on two that really stood out to me, mainly because the depth at the position. Now, wide receivers, it's one of the deepest positions in the draft every single year. There's the most depth there across the board. So to stand out, you really need to really put in an effort across your pro day, your combine, and just show out to really impress organisations that are willing to take you and use that first round pick on you. That being said, Carnell Tate, another Ohio State player. Now, look, he performed well. I don't think I think people were looking a bit too much into his 40-yard dash at 4.54. It's still quick, nonetheless. Like, it's still a great speed across the distance. But then that could be detrimental to his draft stock. But then you look at his season that he had in college. He went 66 targets and he didn't drop one. So you argue that he's the best wide receiver in the draft, but where does he fall? Does a team like the Browns, that obviously they've got needs across the board where they need players, but do they take him at 6? Interesting point there, but I guess, again, we will wait to see. And finally, another player that comes to mind is Malachi Fields out of Notre Dame. Now, again, it didn't do enough to impress me at the combine. Now, again, wide receiver, there's so much depth at this position, especially coming in this year, and I just don't see him being good enough to be where some people on some boards that I've looked at, I don't think he goes that high. I think he does drop to round 2, if not 3. I've seen him going as high as 26 at the Bills, but unfortunately, with the Bills signing DJ Moore throughout the week, I just think he does fall, unfortunately, a little bit further than some people have him. Now, one of the biggest franchise questions this offseason involves the Arizona Cardinals and what they're doing at the quarterback position. And they have made the decision that they are going to move off Kyler. Now, in episode 1, I thought for sure he was staying at Arizona. But nonetheless, they have decided that he's not the future for them, unfortunately. Now, look, there's not really that much difference in dead money and the cap hit that they're going to take. It's about $3 million difference. They're going to have to pay him $55 million anyway, or it's going to be a $58 million dead money hit. So realistically, it's not that much difference. And look, I understand. I think he is still a QB1 at another franchise that you can think your Miamis, maybe your Minnesotas that are looking to move off JJ for another year. But again, we will wait and see to someone that's going to get a cheap quarterback who is, look, he was a first pick, a number 1 pick. He can still play, just he needs to stay healthy. The size has always been an issue with Kyler, but look, I think he does play at another franchise this year. But what does that mean for the franchise as a whole at Arizona, and what sort of direction are they taking? Now, I'll stick by what I said in episode 1. I still think that they go out and get a player like Francis Mauigoa from Miami. You build out that offensive line a bit more, and it really speaks to the quarterbacks coming through the draft class for next season. You could argue Ty Simpson from Alabama is the play here. I don't think it is. Again, I saw a little bit of his combine and I was impressed. He's definitely the number 2 in the draft, but I don't think he's the future for a team like Arizona, especially with how deep the quarterback class of 2027 runs. So I think, again, build out the offensive line. You've got your new coach, and just build it up from there and see what you can do moving into next season. But obviously, that doesn't mean you want to write this year off. Look, last year wasn't great, but you can still build on that this year. And by that, I mean going out and getting a Malik Willis type quarterback. You pay him $9 to $10 million for the year, maybe a team option for next year to have him there as well to sit the quarterback that you draft next year behind and see what you can do. And that helps both parties. It gets you through this year and it builds up Malik's resume to then go out and provide his services to another organisation that may require him in that 27, 28 sort of season maybe. Now, why I decided Malik Willis and what I thought was the key points as to why Malik Willis would be a great fit at the Arizona Cardinals was mainly because of three things. Now, obviously, the LaFleur system from last year. Now he's playing for his brother Mike there in Arizona. Surely they've spoken to each other, Matt and Mike, and have an understanding of the kind of player that Malik is. And then obviously also you've got Nathaniel Hackett as your offensive coordinator there in Arizona now, also at Green Bay last season. And then I found the most interesting part of it was Monty Ossenfort, the current general manager of Arizona, was in Tennessee in the front office as director of player personnel at the time they brought him into the league in 2022. So a lot of connections there for Malik. It makes sense to bring him in and then gets them through the year. And that moves me on to, I guess, the next point of discussion that I would like to make regarding, I guess, where Arizona are heading, and that can push us into what I said I was going to discuss regarding the free agency market last week regarding running backs. But look, it sounds like Arizona are going to move off James Conner. Unfortunately had a horrid year last year with an early injury that saw him out for the rest of the season. So then you go to the free agency and look, there's going to be plenty of availability across that. You've got your wide receiver one in Marvin. You've got Trey McBride that has had another incredible year. You need to go and fill that position in the backfield. Now, saying that, you've got plenty of options. You've got two from Houston that I can think of. Nick Chubb, more than likely out the door, and Joe Mixon already released this week. So that really, after the Houston signing David Montgomery deal went through, I had thought Woody Marks had maybe done enough last season for him to get the job. But look, you bring in a David Montgomery, you put him Woody Marks as RB2, and you see where you go from that. Rico Dowdle, I thought had also done enough at Carolina last season. But again, looks like they're going to move on from him. Potentially another suitor there in Arizona that they could go after. Or Kenneth Walker, another massive one hitting the market by the looks of it. Again, I thought he was going to stay, and I still think there is a little chance that he does. However, it would take a lot. I think he gets better offers across the market in other places. Potentially a Kansas City pickup there, but that says a lot about the Seahawks and where they're at. As well, you've got Charbonnet, who's done an ACL in the playoffs, which then he's had surgery only just last month. So is he back by the time this season starts? Probably not. He's definitely going to miss OTAs. Whether they get him back in time for maybe towards that back end of the season, we will wait and see. Now, let's move on to the wide receiver moves. Now, like I said earlier on in the show, DJ Moore traded to the Buffalo Bills. I for sure thought that was for a play for Max Crosby to Chicago. However, not to be. Now, I think that is a really smart decision from Buffalo. They go and get a guy for Josh Allen. He needed it. Is that the stepping stone to them getting deeper into the playoffs? I think it's certainly a step. Joe Brady coming in as new head coach. You've got this outstanding new facility, stadium there. Look, it'll be interesting to see what they do from here on out. And also obviously a big name moving on from the runners-up of the year is Stephon Diggs. Now, we all sort of saw that happening. Now, look, you've got a bit of age in the wide receiver room. You've also got a little bit of youth. So it's a good balance. I thought maybe Stephon, outside of all these outside issues that he's been having, I thought maybe they would keep him and run it back. He did give you 1,000 yards this season. However, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have been enough for them to keep him there at the organisation. So it'll be interesting to see whether he resigns somewhere else. I certainly think he does still have a lot to offer, and it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Maybe if the Browns don't take a wide receiver with their early first-round pick, potentially could see a Stephon Diggs in Cleveland. Now, last week, I went through who I think's going to be the selections 1 to 5 in the draft. So let's do selections 6 to 10. Now, 6, I have got the Browns taking Carnell Tate. I think he is the best available, and you take him. Look, the Browns have got needs on both sides of the ball, but you need somebody other than Jerry Jeudy to throw the ball to. Depending on who's going to be throwing the ball next year. Again, we have zero idea regarding who the Browns are going to roll with, but I certainly think Carnell Tate is the best position player that you can take, and you go and get him. The Commanders, the Washington Commanders, look, again, another best available sort of situation here. You're desperately looking for an edge rusher who can get to the quarterback and disrupt plays. You only had, I believe, sacks last year, which tied you for third least amount of sacks. So I think you go and get a David Bailey, from Texas Tech here at 7, and you build out that sort of defensive backfield with a guy like David Bailey on the edge. And he's the pick there at 7. On to 8, I think the Saints get a steal here. He should go for higher, but I don't think anybody will take him, and that is Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame. Now, Alvin Kamara is coming off a horrible year with injuries and only the 1 touchdown. He's not getting any younger. You need to look to the future. And arguably, Jeremiah Love is the best player of the draft outside of your Caleb Downs kind of player. But look, he's the best available. He's a generational talent. Early on in the season last year, I thought he was a shoo-in for the Heisman. Look, you take him and you run with him. And I think he's the correct pick there in New Orleans. On to 9. Now, we saw, again, another big trade during the week with Trent McDuffie making his way to the Rams for a bunch of picks. Classic Kansas Chiefs move and also a classic Rams move. Definitely in that Super Bowl window, with probably getting maybe one more year out of Matthew Stafford. So you need to go out and find players like a Trent McDuffie that can move the needle a little bit more and get you closer this time around. In that being said, I think the Kansas City Chiefs take Mansour Delane out of LSU. Now, look, he didn't meet with Kansas City at the Combine. However, I think now that, you have moved off Trent McDuffie, he is the best cornerback of the draft, and you, again, take him. I'm seeing a lot of the, I guess, best available here, and it makes sense, especially in this draft. But and then finally, at 10, the Bengals get an absolute steal, and it's Sonny Styles. Incredible combine. You can move him from the safety position to the linebacker. Hell, I reckon you could play a cornerback position if you asked him to. He's just a freak athlete. One of the best I've seen across a combine, of me watching combines for the last 15 or so years. I think you go and get him and hope for the best to see as well what you can potentially find to replace a Trey Hendrickson that you've decided to move on from. Look, the off-season is only just getting started. The free agency will continue to develop throughout the next couple of weeks as we move towards the draft. And these conversations will continue on, and you will hear it all here from me every week Monday, 6 p.m. So thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.